Chapter 110, OCD. Cosette flinched as she snapped back to the current lapse, tipping the digital clock a little. Horror dominated her face, holding her breath as she blinked her dilated eyes. "What's that?" she muttered with a shaking voice, recalling the sudden memory that surged in her head. The memory was just like her dream last night. It was too crystal clear, the hair on the back of her neck raised. She rubbed her shoulders to calm herself down, shaking her head mildly. Was that another dream, she wondered to herself. A forgotten one, her brows knitted at the thought, turning to her laptop and immediately researched the sudden phenomenon. To her relief, according to Google, it was very normal. Wait, I should write it down. Cosette didn't waste a second and jot down what she just recalled before she would completely forget about it. She tried to be specific, starting from the minimalist house as the location, Maxen's clothes and those tattoos peeking from his open collar, the picture frame, and everything she could recall so she wouldn't get confused later. After writing every detail of the dream, including the location and the people, including herself, Cosette let out a sharp breath. This was tiring her and her brain. These dreams that had been occurring frequently and racking her brain remembering them were already draining her. If not for Maxen's future, Cosette wouldn't bother. Seriously, I know it's my vacation and I was complaining yesterday, but this is a bit too much to handle in a short span of time. She clicked her tongue, eyes falling on the notes she wrote just now. Another sigh escaped her nostrils because now she had two dreams she could remember clearly. Fuck buddies and that one. She clutched her chest as the lingering pain those dreams brought to her heart resurfaced, although it wasn't enough to make herself cry. That rotten piece of milk. Is it possible that Maxen and Cosette were fuck buddies that the author didn't mention? Cosette frowned. If they were, then the author should have mentioned it since that would thicken the plot. But no, the author mentioned nothing about it. As Cosette reviewed the original plot in the novel, the only time she could remember was when Maxen and Cosette appeared in Volume 2. Cosette appeared, she arched a brow and tilted her head to the side. Cosette appeared because she had some business with the Quinn Holdings. That's the first time Asher and Cosette met, and she had already shown an interest in him at first. Wait, can this be? That time, in that dream. Cosette gasped and covered her gaping mouth with her palm. Was it possible that in that particular dream where Cosette and Maxen were in the tub, it was happening at the same time in Volume 1? Well, it was possible since the novel was focused on the main lead's perspectives. Therefore, Cosette and Maxen's points of view wouldn't matter in the novel. Oh my God, she hurriedly picked up the pen and opened another blank page to write down her theory. She didn't put it in the middle of the novel plot, but instead from a different perspective. Cosette didn't have much to write about aside from Cosette and Maxen being connected before they met the leads of the novel. But why? She tapped the end of the pen against the journal, racking her brain about why would Maxen and Cosette break up. Or rather, why would they pretend they didn't know each other even though they met a couple of times in the novel? If my theory is correct and these dreams were from the real Cosette then, that means she liked him. Cosette's eyes softened as she smiled bitterly. Perhaps because she was inside the real Cosette's body, she could feel her emotions from those dreams, and even now, that was what she believed, and no one could change her mind about that. Based on these feelings, Cosette liked Maxen even though lust was the foundation of their relationship. And for the obvious reason, she was aware she was a little special in Maxen one way or another. It might not be a normal relationship, but at the same time, those two weren't normal. The real Cosette had always strived for greatness, wanting to prove herself. She was perfect in every way possible, and that wasn't just a natural gift, but she worked hard to become a fitting leader for the BLK Corporation. Meanwhile, Maxen in the novel was a wicked devil incarnate. He was cunning and dangerous, capable of killing a human being without conscience. They might have led a very different life growing up, but also similar in a way. Both of them didn't enjoy their youth. Those times a person was being honed on how to become an adult. Cosette was too busy involving herself in the company affairs, while Maxen was too busy surviving day by day as a delinquent. Right, Maxen at first believed he was incapable of love, she whispered, recalling that Maxen had proven that in the first arc of Volume 2, where he tormented the female lead as if he held a grudge against her. But because the female lead was smart, Maxen eventually fell in love with her, but he could no longer erase the things he had done to her. It's the same with Cosette. This time, Cosette trailed off as she furrowed her brows. That's right. She can't fall in love after getting betrayed by her fiancé. Cosette rubbed her chin, recalling that the side stories included the villainess's past, instead of what happened to her after the book ended. It disappointed her while reading it since most readers were more inclined to read and know what happened to the characters after the book ended, but the author didn't give that to her readers. Now that I think about it, what happened to the villainess Cosette after Asher and Mia tied the knot? She murmured, tilting her head to the side. This had never crossed Cosette until now that she was doing an extensive review of the novel. Ugh, I always have a love-hate relationship with the author, but why does she make it so hard? Cosette clasped her hair as her head throbbed. If this continues, I think only hate will remain between us. Cosette thought long and hard about it, but to no avail. All she came up with was the possibility of the villain and the villainess becoming fuck buddies. But the reason why those two pretended they didn't know each other and stayed away from each other's way still left a giant mystery to her. Meanwhile, "Good morning, Sir Max," Lucia greeted with a smile as she helped in the kitchen, while Maxen went to the counter to pick up an apple. Maxen leaned against the counter, watching Lucia prepare the lunch boxes where they would usually store them. His brows furrowed, curious. As far as he knew, no one used those lunch boxes the entire summer. So why did Lucia wash them and was carefully putting them in the drawer? As Maxen was watching her while eating an apple and leaning against the counter, Lucia glanced over her shoulder. A chuckle slipped past her lips upon noticing the curiosity in Maxen's eyes. "Even when they weren't being used, I still wash them and put them back carefully since the young miss won't like it," she explained while putting back the lunch box, making his brows to furrow. Storing them wasn't what took Lucia that long, but because she was arranging them as if she was displaying a painting in a gallery. "Cosette won't like it," Maxen repeated, watching Lucia look back at him and nod. The young miss had always liked things to be organized. Even back then, she hates it when something in her room was moved in the slightest. But Cosette isn't like that. Lucia paused and looked back at him, bearing a polite smile. The young miss's condition, her habits started with a small space. Back then, she had this small box containing her toys, and we should arrange them in a particular order. But as she grew older, she shifted this overly organized habit to her room. That is why I am the only one who cleans it. Really? Maxen furrowed his brows as this was news to him. Does she have OCD? So far, the young miss seemed all right. Lucia's smile stretched broader while looking at Maxen. For her, Cosette's obsessiveness over the position of things has slightly put a pause because of Maxen and the young miss's current lifestyle. The old nanny had always been worried that Cosette's condition would spread and would soon take over the entire residence, just like how she started from a small box to her bedroom. "Anyway, I will go check on her. She's probably awake by now." Lucia bowed at Maxen and then checked the drawer where she kept the lunch boxes, just like how Cosette would stack them up. When she left, Maxen stayed leaning against the counter, but his chewing slowed down. "Now that I think about it," he whispered, looking at the way where Lucia left. "She gets very annoyed when I move her thing." Lucia slipped up and I'm certain she said condition. "Should I look into it?" Chapter 111, First Day. No matter how hard Cosette racked her brain, she was met with a dead end. She couldn't figure out everything with just two clear memories in her head. Moreover, although she had a logical theory, there were just myriads of questions in her head that followed that theory. She came up with different theories, both nonsense and a bit more logical. That was all Cosette thought in the entire morning, and even during showering, but to no avail. In the end, she was still stuck in her first theory that Cosette and Maxen were somehow acquainted with benefits before the volume 2 of the novel. Really? Is this some sort of plot hole or something? Or was the author planning to write another volume? Cosette mumbled as she was on her way to the dining after her morning ritual. But why upload side stories? Maybe a series. "Were you raiding all this morning?" Cosette jumped as soon as she stepped foot in the lobby, hearing Maxen's voice to her side. She twisted her neck to her right, seeing Maxen leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Good morning, Max." She bit her inner lower lip as she winced internally. What was that awkward tone? She already told herself to act normal if she bumped into Maxen. "Were you reading all morning? That's why you only came out now?" he asked, pulling his back from the wall to face her squarely. Well, sort of." She massaged her nape, forcing a smile. Cosette raised her brows as she glossed her eyes around before setting them back on him. "What are you doing here, Max? You look like you're waiting." She trailed off and furrowed her brows. She pointed at herself. "Were you waiting for me?" "I'm not allowed to approach your room. That's why I'm here." Why?" She tilted her head to the side, blinking almost innocently. Maxen's expression was duller than usual, looking back at her with a dead expression. "What do you mean, why?" "I mean, why would you?" Cosette pursed her lips, swallowing down a mouthful of saliva. She raised her brows, holding her hand behind her. "About last night." He nodded. "I need to talk to you about it, but let's have breakfast first." Maxen tipped his head in the direction of the dining hall, shoving his hands inside his pocket as he sauntered off. As he walked away, Cosette let out a shallow breath. Her eyes stayed on his back, recalling the other memory she retrieved this morning. Compared to the Maxen Devilsin in her dreams, this Maxen didn't look that dangerous. Was it the body build or his inked body? But then again, the Cosette in those dreams didn't seem scared of him as well. I think I'm going crazy, she thought, dragging her feet to follow Maxen before he looks back. Whenever I tell myself not to focus on the novel and live my life, this always happens. I really dislike that rotten piece of milk. With that being said, Maxen and Cosette navigated their way to the dining hall. Everyone was already used to their routine, and seeing them dining together wasn't a new sight to behold. As usual, the table was served with a healthy breakfast. After serving all the food, the servants left them alone in the dining hall, as this had become the new norm in the manor, instead of the maids standing on the side to wait for any orders from Conrad or Cosette. Cosette could not help but glance at Maxen as they ate in silence. Maxen was acting like usual, eating without looking at her or saying anything. The anxiety building up inside her chest steadily increased, wondering what he would tell her since they somehow towed the line last night. Wait, her brows furrowed as her back stiffened. He won't ask me to forget last night, right, or become friends with benefits. Her mouth fell open, scrunching her nose up in dismay. She glared at Maxen, narrowing her eyes suspiciously. I'll kick him in the gut if he ever mentions being that sort of buddies, she threatened in her heart, shoving a piece of bacon in her mouth, eyes glinting at Maxen. After all we've been through, that's all he will see me. Ha, Maxen Cloven, I want to see you try. While Cosette's head and anxiety spiked up, creating different scenarios in her head, Maxen suddenly felt a chill run up his spine. His brows rose, glancing at Cosette, only to see her chewing intensely while looking at him angrily. What did I do? He wondered, tilting his head to the side. Was it about last night? Maxen planned for them to eat first since Cosette didn't have a proper meal last night. Although she mostly ate the snacks while watching, it was still better if she eat a meal with proper nutrition. Hence, he wasn't talking about last night's event, afraid it would affect her appetite. About last night, Maxen cleared his throat, biting his tongue. What about it? She returned, eyes burning with intrigue and anger. Her expression forced Maxen to consider his words, as it seemed she would end him if he ever said something amiss. Although Maxen didn't plan on proposing what was already in her head, he still couldn't help but have second thoughts in himself. A shallow breath slipped past his lips as he fluttered his eyelashes, resting his arm against the edge of the table. He fixed his eyes on her, cheering himself to say what had been bugging him since last night, but just as he opened his mouth, his tongue rolled back when she clicked her tongue in irritation. Forget it, he shook his head and huffed sharply. Let's talk about it next time. No, Max, we should talk about it now since it will bother me the entire day, Cosette urged with a kind smile, which looked so fake in his eyes. What are you going to say, It's all right, let's talk. Cosette kept her smile, raising her brows. Don't tell me this is like an eat and run scenario. His brows furrowed, tilting his head to the side in confusion. Eat and run. Eat and run means you eat at your heart's content and then run away when it's time to pay, she explained in a matter-of-fact tone, scoffing with the thought as it seemed to her that would be the case. Perhaps it was because of the dream where they were simply fuck buddies that amplified her emotions. Cosette wasn't sure, but shouldn't Maxen take responsibility? He touched her everywhere, and that lip of his even left hickeys around her breast. How could he do that to her, and then forget about it? Forget it, Cosette clicked her tongue and let out a sharp breath. We are young and can be a little wild. It's not like we should force ourselves to have some labeled tusk, whatever. What are you mumbling? He asked with an arched brow. Maxen looked around, and when he was sure no one was there to listen to them, he refocused his attention on the girl across from him. I just want to ask, what are we now? Cosette slowly raised her eyes, blinking, watching him run his tongue across his inner cheek. Last night, we did things and crossed the line. You fell asleep soundlessly, but I couldn't. I kept thinking and asking myself questions such as, was it just the moment? What are we now? Should I pretend it didn't happen? Should we do it again? And the sort, he explained solemnly, taking a leap of faith and putting his heart out there since Cosette had always been transparent with him. Hence, he wanted to do the same since he was the man here. It was too embarrassing if the only time he would have courage was when it was in the heat of the moment. What do you mean? Came out a quiet voice, eyes fixed on him. What I mean is I like you. Her heart skipped a beat as he clicked his tongue and winced as if he slipped up. Maxen exhaled sharply, raising his conflicted eyes to her. And I'm confused as hell as where to stand here. Do I have the right to hold your hand? Or what? What are we? Why did you let me? Why do you keep saying it's because it's me? Cosette pursed her lips, lowering her eyes to hide the giddy expression. She took a deep breath before meeting his eyes again. You want to be? Cosette cleared her throat when her tongue rolled back. What do you think? Huh? He sported a helpless countenance at her vague response. What do you mean by that? Should we start dating? She suggested, biting her lower lip to suppress her smile, but to no avail. Her eyes shone with happiness, her heart relieved, as if she had achieved something she had been wanting to achieve. Date? She nodded. I mean, I don't want to force you if you don't want. Ugh, her brows knitted at that brief sound he made. What, I want to, he confessed, biting his tongue secretly. Date, I mean. Maxen watched how she pressed her lips together, but the corner of her lips still turned up. Her eyes shone with joy, making his heart flutter. She's happy, he wondered, as he didn't expect such a reaction from her. Assuming he was only the one who had such ridiculous thoughts as dating. God, I love her. Then today is our first day, she announced with a smile that was enough to blind him, cupping her cheek, eyes squinting before she stressed, You're mine now. Chapter 112, It was hell of a summer break. You're mine now. Maxen looked at Cosette with slight surprise, letting out a dry laugh as he processed her words. He leaned his arm against the table, lips curling into a charming smirk. No, he shook his head, you are. Cosette was his now, forever. Cosette pursed her lips to suppress her smile, looking up at him. Both of them chuckled, shaking their head, pleased at the outcome of their situation. Eat Max, she mumbled, forking a piece on her plate. His eyes were soft, smiling. The two of them continued to eat happily. Their stomach hadn't been full, but their hearts felt full already. Even though they didn't exchange words much throughout their breakfast, they were already satisfied each time they stole a glance at each other, only for their eyes to meet. For Cosette, she had been beating herself since this morning from those vivid dreams. What happened last night between her and Maxen wasn't helping, as it added to her worry about how to face him. She thought Maxen would either pretend it didn't happen, which was the most obvious thing he would do, or become a total jerk and subject her to a relationship with no strings attached. Just the sheer thought of the latter was akin to giving her heart as a hostage. So, how the talk ended was akin to a thorn being plucked out of her throat. Meanwhile, Maxen was beyond overjoyed. It was true he barely slept last night after carrying her to her bedroom. Myriads of questions hovered over his head and even prepared himself for heartache for expecting anything from her the next day. However, just those words, "You're mine now," washed away all those worries. Cosette had always been so reassuring, considerate, and decisive. He was glad he had learned from her, and took a leap of faith instead of putting what happened behind them. If only he did, this would haunt him forever, and he wouldn't be smiling the way he was smiling while eating. Today was a good day. It might have started a little rough for the both of them with the confusion filling their heads, but their mutual agreement just flipped everything like a switch. After Maxen and Cosette finished their meal, they headed to the garden to take a casual walk. They walked side by side, leaving a palm-length gap between them. Cosette lowered her eyes, biting her lips, while Maxen constantly cast her a glance. I don't know what to say, she breathed out in distress, looking up at him to reveal the faint tint on her cheek. Maxen massaged his nape, glancing at her with the same conflict in his eyes. Me too, he confessed. We rarely talk. Right, Cosette pinched the space between her brows. Now that she thought about it, Maxen wasn't much of a talker and would only speak when necessary. It was mostly Cosette who carried the conversation, but now that she was too flustered, she couldn't even bring up the silliest thing. Should we really have to? She snapped her eyes at Maxen, seeing him look ahead as he walked on the gravel path leisurely. I'm fine having you around. You don't need to talk that much, or at least, you don't need to force a conversation. I'm content with your presence, and that's good enough for me. Cosette stopped in her tracks, eyes on him. Max, she whispered, a subtle smile dominating her face as she stared at his back. Maxen stopped after 3 more steps, looking back at her with his hands inside his pocket. Just stay the way you are. The only thing that changed between us is that. He paused, taking out his hand and extending it to her. We can now hold hands. My God, Cosette's heart drummed against her chest, because Maxen looked like an angel offering his hand to guide her to the paradise up above. His slight smile might have fallen short because he wasn't used to smiling, but his eyes sheltered a million unspoken words that weren't needed to be uttered for her not to feel the affection in them. With a smile, Cosette reached for his hand and clasped it. As she took several steps to stand beside him, his fingers slipped in between the gaps of her fingers. Are you not scared if someone saw us? She asked with a grin, making him look up to ponder. Right, Maxen ran his tongue across his inner cheek, raising his brows. Should I let go? Cosette frowned and slapped his shoulder. Her violent action made him flinch, rubbing his shoulder using his free hand. How could you? She clicked her tongue in irritation, glaring daggers at him. What if they see us? You told my dad you and I kissed. That's different from then and now. What? How? Scared? Maxen remained silent for a moment before he nodded. I am. My dad doesn't bite. He doesn't, but he can kick me out and I won't see you day and night. He shrugged, taking a deep breath as he took a step forward, but he didn't let her hand go, looking ahead with a slight smile. I don't mind returning to that small apartment room and living in the dirt, but I'm more worried about the fact I won't see you more often. Cosette blushed, skipping her steps to catch up to him, so they were walking side by side. Then you should let my hand go. It's worth the risk. He cast her a look. I'm in debt to your father, and the only way I can repay this debt for realigning my life is for me to do better in life and help others when my hard work bears fruit, and also to not shame his daughter for choosing me, when she had a better option. You're not an option, she mumbled, looking ahead while Maxen glanced at her. You're the only option. He bit his lower lips, drawing a deep breath to stop himself from showing more of his affection. He should not be greedy like last night and be satisfied holding her hand. They won't talk, don't worry, Cosette reassured as her lips stretched from ear to ear, winking at Maxen. The servants already knew. About us? About me, my feelings, she confessed, looking back at the mansion to the side. Most of them have been working here for years, and they know I had a huge crush on someone, but this dummy doesn't even realize it even when I wake up early in the morning to make his lunchboxes. Cosette could not help but let out a ch as she looked up at him. Not everyone is as dense as you, Max. Gosh. All that courtship and this dummy still hadn't realized it until this moment. Maxen's steps slowly came to a halt, fixing his eyes on her. When she noticed her hand was being left behind, Cosette looked back at him with raised brows. Yes, she hummed, cocking her head to the side. Why? He asked, filling her eyes with puzzlement. What did you see in me that time? Her lips stretched until her teeth were showing. You. Me? He let out a dry laugh. Does he look better than others? That's a weird question to ask. Cosette marched back until she was standing before him. Was there anyone better than Maxen? There was, he answered in his head. There was a ton on his list, actually. Not just Luke or Asher, but there were even better guys out there who liked her. But her eyes still sparkled while looking at him up close, and Maxen had seen this look in her eyes even back when he deemed himself unattractive. The luster in her eyes back then and now was the same, and there was no vestige of fakery in them. Maxen stared at her clear hazel eyes that were mirroring him, and just like the time when he had more fat and traces of stress, he looked a man with value in them. There were tons of guys who would line up to get her slightest attention, but never once had she ever noticed she would look at them the same way. Maybe she had this distinct look in her eyes in front of Luke and Asher, but they weren't as sweet and affectionate as whenever she would look at him. He was at his worst when she came, and he wanted her to have his very best. Maxen raised his other hand and cupped her beautiful face. His eyes softened, just like how his heart warmed up. Thank you, he whispered with a subtle and gentle smile, for seeing me. Cosette pursed her lips bashfully, slapping his chest mildly. Gosh, this is really a novel. I don't think such things really happen in real life, she mumbled, suppressing herself from squealing her lungs out. I like you. This time she flinched and looked back at him. Did that sound weird? She shook her head and grinned. Say it again. No. Please, she tugged his hand mildly while sporting puppy eyes. He breathed out, finding it harder now that he had to repeat it the second time. It's like you. Cosette grinned from ear to ear. I like you more, and before he could process her words, she dragged him for a run to keep him busy. Surely their summer was quite a vacation full of twists and turns that neither of them expected. However, both of them could safely say it was one memorable summer, a time they would forever cherish to adulthood. End of Volume 2. Chapter 113, Weird Taste. Cosette spent the last few days of the summer break with Maxen. They had a talk regarding the setup of their relationship. After all, Maxen regarded Conan with the highest respect he could give to a man, and he didn't want to hide their relationship status. He was prepared to get kicked out and work hard, be better in school, and succeed in life to be able to stand on the same ground as her. However, Cosette crushed his plans with a simple no. He might be ready to get kicked out, but not Cosette. She would rather hide it for the time being, for the sole reason she knew Conrad. Her father was aware of Cosette's feelings toward Maxen, and she had been very open about it. Moreover, she worked under her father for straight 2 months. Therefore, Cosette had somehow guessed how the gears in her father's head turned. Conrad would not kick Maxen out if they told him about their relationship. Her father would insist for Maxen to stay, so everyone could keep an eye on them. There wouldn't be privacy anymore, and that also meant less kisses. She liked his kisses very much and would eat them as an alternative to food. At first, Cosette assumed Maxen wouldn't listen and just spill all the tea. But alas, Maxen agreed, for the sole reason, just like her. And with that, they spent the last several days either reading or watching or going out to buy small things, a short date together. They had been very subtle about it, especially when Conrad was around. It wasn't like the change was huge, aside from the habitual touch in the hand and short, sneak pecks. Bye, Cosette waved with her upper body tilting to the side to see Conrad, inside the back passenger seat of the black sedan. The latter glanced at her, and then at Maxen standing behind her under the waiting shade of the bus. "Take care, Papa," her lips stretched from ear to ear until her eyes were squinting. "Take care," Conrad replied coolly, darting his eyes between the two. "You too." "Yes, Tilda." Conrad stared at her bright smile for some time, and let out a sigh. His daughter looked so excited and happy since today was the first day of class. "See you later," he remarked, only to hear her repeating it in a more cheerful tone. With that being said, the car sped away leaving Cosette waving under the bus stop. "Ha," she huffed, keeping her eyes on the rear of the black sedan. "I hope he has a good day." Cosette grinned as she looked back at Maxen, only to see him arching a brow at her. Looking at him, she was still in disbelief at how tall he grew all summer. Before, she didn't need to look up so much, but now her head could only reach his shoulder. It was amazing at the same time, disheartening. "What?" The lines between his forehead deepened at her prolonged silence. He then touched his face, lest he had some crumbs left. "I still can't believe you grew tall this much and in a short span of time." She narrowed her eyes, facing him squarely. Cosette sized him up while rubbing her chin. "Max, what have you been doing all summer, I don't think this is some sort of perk." "I didn't grow tall that much." He cocked his head to the side. "I lost weight." She shook her head, taking a step closer. "Before my head is over your upper lip, but now look." She measured her height, bussing it on his shoulder blades, scoffing in dismay when she realized she was short a centimeter from it. "Is this a bad thing now?" he asked, looking down at her miffed countenance. "Do you prefer short guys? You have a weird taste." "But my neck hurts," she complained with a pout. "Ah," Maxen bent over, making her take several steps back in surprise. "What a kiss in broad daylight," she gasped, making him chuckle as he rested his hand on his thigh. "Do you want to?" he teased, smirking as he watched her face dyed in red. "I'm kidding. Does your neck still hurt this way?" Her brows rose, blinking twice, realizing he bent over so she wasn't looking up. Cosette bit her lower lip before rocking her head mildly. Maxen didn't change much, even when they were now dating, but he would still make her heart flutter during the most unexpected times, just like this one. "You don't have to do this." She poked his shoulder, pursing her lips to stop herself from smiling from ear to ear. "Gosh, why do you have to make me blush all the time? My heart will explode at this rate." He chuckled, snapping his eyes as he looked back. "The bus is here," he announced, straightening his back with his eyes on the approaching bus. As he waited, Cosette kept her eyes on him. "I feel bad for keeping this a secret from Dad, but help. I had to work hard to tie him with me." Cosette mentally giggled. When the bus stopped in front of them, she hurriedly reached for his hand, which made him look back at her. "Let's hold hand," she proposed while the bus opened its door for them. "MHM," he hummed, wrapping his fingers around her and guided her to the bus. Her smile stretched even wider as she followed him. Since it was too early, there weren't many passengers yet. Maxen and Cosette perched on the spot near the back and sat beside each other. He held her hand even when they sat down. This wasn't the first time they held each other hands, but compared to last school year, they could distinguish the difference. Just months ago, Cosette would squeeze herself into him, but now Maxen was guarding her and holding her hand all on his own. Taking this opportunity, Cosette giddily rested the side of her head on his shoulder blades, smiling from ear to ear, eyes closed. "I'll take a nap," she explained lest he complained. "Wake me up later." Maxen let out a shallow breath and shook his head. He didn't reply, but he stayed still, letting her use his shoulder to lean on. They both traveled with a smile on their faces, playing with each other's hands like lovers would. Meanwhile, Conrad remained silent like usual, staring at the window as they head to the BLK Corporation office. His mind drifted to Cosette's behavior the past several days after she finished her internship in the company. As his mind drifted further away, his phone inside his pocket suit vibrated. Conrad snapped his eyes and took out the phone to his ear. He didn't even look who it was, assuming it was Warren, since only a few people knew his personal contact number. However, Conrad soon realized he made a mistake, as there was this shameless old folk who was akin to a stalker worthy to rot behind bars. "Good morning, my dearest best friend. Ha ha, I didn't know you'd answer call from an unregistered number." Conrad closed his eyes as soon as he recognized Maynard's voice from the other end of the line. His jaw instantly clenched while his grip on his phone tightened. It was too early to get stressed, was what he told himself, but hearing Maynard's voice early in the morning was already a good sign, a sign his day wouldn't get any worse. "Haha, I can imagine you are, telling yourself to choose peace before violence." Maynard happily grinned, imagining the look on Conrad's unchanging, stony countenance. Just the thought of it made him happy, as if he had nothing else to do during this time. "Make sure this call is important, Mr. Quinn." "Oh ho, of course it is. Speak, let's not waste our time." Ha ha ha, Maynard's awkward laughter slowly faded, but then he snapped his eyes, knowing Conrad was about to hang up on him. "Wait. You are wasting precious my time," Conrad stressed coldly, as the life in his eyes already diminished. "If you have nothing else to do, take your sons to an amusement park and become a father." "Oh ho, Mr. Black, why do you have to make it sound like I'm a bad father?" Maynard snorted. "I didn't say that, it's you who said it. I'm hanging up." "Oi, don't forget you allowed your daughter to take home a man, eh? I mean, they might be minors, but they're at the age of being wild and curious. I'm not the only one who is a terrible dad here." Maynard prattled like usual without thinking of what he would say just because he was talking to a good friend. But when he realized the sudden silence that followed, he couldn't help but swallow the building tension in his throat. "I mean, you're right, I'm the bad father and the annoying friend," he confessed, smelling Conrad's wrath from a mile away. Chapter 114, A Secret Meeting. "I means you're right, I'm the bad father and the annoying friend." Conrad kept his eyes sharp, looking out at the window. He was already used to Maynard's insensitive and nosy nature, so he didn't take it to the heart. But it still hit a nerve in his head, which didn't sit well with him. "I told Cosette," Conrad spoke, making Maynard raise his brows. "During her internship, I told her I don't want her to get married until she's 50. "What? Hey, that's even more selfish." "And I'd make sure she'll grow old alone than have the Quinns as my in-laws," Conrad added, making Maynard gasp in dismay. The side of his lips curled up as his eyes drooped, but it still didn't conceal the danger lurking within them. "The only reason you are this confident is that the Quinns are the perfect candidate to marry my daughter off." It was the same with the Quinns. "Cosette is the number one on your list of candidates, and seeing how persistent you are, I bet you already got their birthdays checked, and she matched perfectly well with either of your sons," Conrad continued. "Ha, she matched with both of them," Maynard blurted out and then bit his tongue when he realized the slip-up. "You are criticizing me for how I am raising my daughter and allowing her to take home a man at such a young age." Conrad ignored Maynard's previous remarks, snapping his eyes ever so tenderly. "You are correct that I might be a neglectful father. However, realistically speaking, I have a good eye for business. What I'm saying is, I look at my daughter and I know one of these days, a man will eventually take her away from me. The Quinns had been eyeing her like some land they should purchase before her value will increase. I'm not selling her to greedy folks like you." Conrad smirked dangerously. "I'd rather raise a young man and teach him how to treat my daughter like a queen, how to protect her from people like you, and share the same outlook in life." "What?" Maynard gasped, wide-eyed, guessing where this scheme was going. "You better tell your sons to do their best. Maybe mentor them properly, since you had a very interesting history. Or else a nobody, just as what you folks see Max, will not share even a piece of the cake." Conrad's smirk stretched broad, glancing at his phone, imagining Maynard's horrified expression. "Thank me later, since I'm helping you teach your son that they can't get everything they want just because they want it." "Hey," Maynard, who was also sitting behind the back seat of the car, gasped. He looked at the phone in disbelief as Conrad hung up on him just like that. Wow. Did he, oh goodness, did he hold a grudge? Wow. I'm actually speechless. That damned wow. Maynard could only scoff while shaking his head in disbelief, completely forgetting the important reason he called Conrad. Although he didn't plan to ruin Conrad's mood, the latter ruined his, but he should have seen it coming. Meanwhile, Conrad placed the phone back inside his pocket suit and chuckled with his lips closed. Just like Maynard, Conrad had known that guy for decades. Therefore, he could imagine the shock on Maynard Quinn's face. That man should have kept his mouth shut, instead of proudly admitting to using Cosette as lecture material. Conrad wasn't the type to let things slide, especially if it involved his daughter. Conrad then looked at the window once more, his lips curled up. His mind drifted several nights ago that involved Maxen. Flashback. Conrad had always been busy, and he realized he and Warren had gotten even busier when Cosette finished her internship. The day after his last business trip, Conrad returned home a bit late than expected. When he reached home, it was already nighttime. As usual, Cosette spent time with him before bidding him good night, since she was considerate that he needed rest. However, instead of resting, Conrad stayed in his study to review a document so he wouldn't worry about it the next day. As the night fell deeper and the world grew quiet, a knock from outside his office shattered his silence. Conrad raised his head and spoke, "Come in," to the person outside. When it opened, his brows slightly rose, seeing Maxen enter his study room. "Max," he called, watching Maxen stand near the set of couches while facing him, who sat behind the desk. "It's already late." "It is already late, sir. That is why I am here, since Cosette had been worried about your schedule." Conrad rocked his head, knowing Cosette was the type to get worried. After all, she had been quite strict during her internship and restricted Conrad from working at home. However, he couldn't fall asleep with the things that made his brain active. "Why are you here?" he asked, shifting the subject and getting to the point. "Did something happen?" Conrad furrowed his brows when a minute had passed, and Maxen just stared at him. He knew this young man since Maxen had been living under the same roof for months now. Maxen wouldn't come to his study, and at this late hour, if it wasn't important. Maxen drew a deep breath and closed his eyes momentarily. When he reopened his eyes, Conrad caught the determination in the young man's eyes. "Cosette and I are dating now." It took Conrad several seconds to process this confession. He then planted his palms on the surface of the desk, pushing himself up. Unlike the first time Maxen confessed to kissing his daughter, Conrad was calmer now. Conrad sauntered toward the stand where the decanter and wineglass were. On his way, he stopped and looked back at Maxen's motionless figure. "Continue," he urged calmly, making Maxen nod, while he resumed in his strides. As Conrad stopped in front of the stand and poured himself a glass of wine, Maxen continued his confession fearlessly. "I like Cosette, sir, and she likes me, so we agreed we should date." Maxen kept his eyes on Conrad's back, watching the latter turn around with 2 glasses in his hands. "She wants to keep it a secret from you for now, because she knows you'll restrict us from having some time alone." Chapter 115, Bonus Chapter A Secret Meeting II. "I like Cosette, sir, and she likes me, so we agreed we should date." Maxen kept his eyes on Conrad's back, watching the latter turn around with 2 glasses in his hands. "She wants to keep it a secret from you for now, because she knows you'll restrict us from having some time alone." "I see." Conrad rocked his head, sauntering towards the head seat. When he plopped his butt down, he looked up at Maxen and tipped his head to the other couch. "Come sit." Maxen gulped and nodded. As instructed, Maxen perched on the long couch, lowering his eyes when Conrad slid the glass in front of him. He raised his head at Conrad and saw the latter lean back, resting his leg over the other while holding the glass. "Then why did you tell me?" asked Conrad to Maxen calmly, knowing the young man wasn't lying. "If she told you to keep it a secret, why are you here and knocking on death's door?" "As I've mentioned, I like her, and I plan to marry her someday." Conrad chuckled dryly. "You want to marry her? It might be pretentious and ambitious now, but I know how you cherish her. I also know that you want to give her the world, and I have nothing. I'm a nobody right now." Maxen held Conrad's eyes bravely, manning up and facing what he had to face. "But I'm not breaking up with Cosette if you ask me now. I know I owe you my life, but I can let go of this comfort in life." "Not her. Cosette wants to keep it a secret from you, but I can't look you in the eye, knowing I am holding her hand whenever you look away. I respect you, and the only repayment I can do for everything you had done for me is to cherish her more than you can do. And do better in life so she wouldn't be ashamed if I stood beside her in public," Maxen added solemnly, clasping his fist on his lap. Silence descended on their shoulders as they looked at each other. Every second felt like minutes for Maxen, as Conrad didn't speak a word for a very long time. "She'll kill you if you told her you told me about your relationship." Maxen's brows rose the second he heard Conrad's low chuckle. "My daughter knows me well. What do I do to her?" "It's not her fault. I'll look for a place tonight and move out first thing in the morning." Maxen lowered his head, only to raise it at Conrad's answer. "She wants to keep it a secret, knowing I will not kick you out but order everyone to monitor you." Conrad shook his head, raising his glass of wine to his lips, eyes on Maxen. Don't tell her I already know. Maxen let out a shallow breath, but he stopped when Conrad shook his head once more before sipping from the glass. I don't need to tell everyone to keep an eye on you. Conrad licked his lips and smacked them, pointing a finger at him. I don't need to do that. All I need is for you to promise to preserve her chastity until you think you already deserve to put a ring on it. Pardon. Give me your word, Maxen Cloven. Conrad leaned forward, propping his arms on the armrest. Don't touch her before you get married. Do I need to be explicit regarding that? No, I understand, sir. Maxen shook his head, making Conrad rock his head. Then I trust you. Why? Maxen perked up with genuine wonder in his eyes. Aren't you worried I will not honor my words? I said I trust you, more than my daughter now regarding this. Conrad leaned back comfortably. Moreover, I've observed you enough to know you care for her genuinely. You're young, and yet your pride won't allow you to look at what you can get by tying her down. Conrad arched a brow and cocked his head to the side. If I'm going to choose the person she would spend a lifetime with, I'd rather raise someone who can do the job properly, instead of welcoming someone from another family and know him based on the results of his background check. I've seen them all, he continued. People who were raised in a great background could have a clean record but a nasty secret. The world outside is a scary place, and I won't welcome anyone so easily. What I am saying is, the Quinns had been pestering me for an arranged marriage. I know both Asher Quinn and Lucas Quinn, and I can say they were both raised well. However, they were still young. Asher reminded me of Cosette in the past. He was an overachiever and focused on life, while the younger Quinn reminded me of his father. Both are silly, Conrad added, swirling the glass in his hand leisurely. The Quinns might be a great family, but I won't allow them to be part of Cosette's life. Conrad's eyes fell on Maxen once more. However, I have no power in that if somehow one of them captured my daughter's heart. The Quinns always had their way to people's hearts and bedazzled everyone with their unique charms. Maxen furrowed his brows after listening attentively to the man. He looked at Conrad solemnly, before he concluded what Conrad didn't speak. You were saying, he trailed off when Conrad nodded. I'm saying I'm putting my bet on you, Maxen. Conrad pointed at him. I won't say no if Cosette told me herself she wanted to spend the rest of her life with either Asher or Lucas, and I won't say no if she wanted to be with someone else. I have no power, nor do I believe I have a say in it. If that ever happened, I'm blaming you. Maxen swallowed a mouthful of air at the sudden pressure placed on his back. However, this pressure of having to make sure Cosette wouldn't introduce anyone else to Conrad in the future was the type of challenge Maxen was willing to take, because at the end of the day, Maxen was serious about making Cosette his wife. I understand. Maxen lowered his head, and when he raised it, a glint of determination flickered across his eyes. I won't let you experience such a horrible thing to welcome an outsider in your life, especially not the Quinns. Don't disappoint me, Conrad smirked, raising a brow at the glass in front of Maxen. The latter nodded and picked it up, making Conrad raise his glass for a toast. Chapter 116, Welcome Juniors. Maxen let out a dry chuckle, walking beside Cosette on their way to their school. He just recalled the conversation he had with Conrad, and it felt like a thorn was plucked out of his throat, knowing Conrad was aware of his relationship with Cosette. Why are you smiling? Cosette tilted her head to the side, watching him look back at her. Maxen flashed her a kind smile and shook his head. Nothing, I just remembered something, he explained, raising his hand to pat her head. She walked slower, something funny. Not funny per se, more like something I'm relieved about. He withdrew his hand, shoving it inside his pocket. He looked ahead, keeping his lips closed, but the side was curled up. Seeing him in a good mood, Cosette just nodded and looked ahead. To Cosette, for as long as Maxen was happy, she was also happy. It wasn't like she wasn't happy with her current status with him, but she cared for him so much. Her smile, however, faded when she remembered her father. She looked down to hide the guilt in her eyes. Should I tell him secretly and strike a deal with him? She wondered, knowing she couldn't keep a secret from her father that long. After all, Conrad trusted her and had been very understanding. Keeping her relationship with Maxen from Conrad had always tugged her conscience, but she needed some sort of plan. Not that Cosette was worried Conrad would kick Maxen out. She knew her father very well and he wouldn't do that. Still, she didn't like being restricted, despite knowing it was for her own good. Oh, youth. Whatever, I'll come up with a plan. Cosette glanced at Maxen and smiled subtly. Her eyes grew soft just seeing his slight smile and the luster from the corner of his eyes. That's right, I'll come up with a plan to protect him and his heart. Cosette peeled her eyes away from him and drew a deep breath. Her mood slowly grew better since she couldn't help but recall the difference between when she met Maxen and the current Maxen. Back then, Maxen's eyes were just dark. There was no life in them. He carried the eyes of a man who had lost everything, or rather, the eyes of a person who had nothing to lose anymore. But now, the shine in his eyes brought warmth to her heart instead of pain. Cosette no longer had the urge to cry just by looking at him. As they walked side by side, Maxen unintentionally brushed her arms. He glanced at her and smiled, seeing her exciting front. His eyes then fell on her hand, making his brow arch. Without saying a word, he carefully reached for her hand, but just before his pinky could hold her fingers, he halted when a car suddenly drove past them like a bolt of lightning. Maxen and Cosette automatically paused, staring at the car's rear. Their brows furrowed when it suddenly stopped, only to move in reverse at the same speed. My nightmare, Maxen thought as they faced the car upon stopping beside them, is here. Hello, hello, the window from the backseat rolled down, revealing the charming second young master of the Quinn family, Luc, Cozy Tilda. Good morning, Luc, Cosette chuckled awkwardly, watching Luc talk to the driver to stop him off there. When Luc opened the door, Maxen grabbed her arm and pulled her back to save her from hitting the door. Oh, she looked back at Maxen and sighed, seeing the ugly frown on his face. Thanks. Cozy, Luc exclaimed the second he hitched outside the car, furrowing his brows when he noticed Maxen holding her arm. Oi, oi, this is too early for our rivalry, eh? Luc hurriedly held Maxen's wrist and Cosette's arm, separating them as fast as he could. Even Cosette couldn't react quickly to how he was, darting her eyes between Luc and Maxen. Wow, have you been beating yourself to grow tall like this? Luc blinked twice and was in awe, looking at Maxen from head to toe and then up again. Just when I thought I can look down on you, wow, this is unbelievable. Have you been injecting yourself with all sorts of vitamins? Get your hands off of me. Maxen clicked his tongue in irritation, snatching his wrist away from Luc. Meanwhile, Cosette darted her eyes between the two before she realized her neck felt a little stiff. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and darted her eyes between the two again. What have they been doing this summer? She wondered, furrowing her brows in disbelief. I had seen Luc a few times during the summer, but he wasn't. I noticed he had grown a bit, but not this much. Back then, Maxen and Luc were nearly at the same height. The only reason Luc was a bit taller from a distance was because of his lean figure. But now that Maxen and Luc were standing in front of each other while Luc had started his drama, they were still around the same height while Cosette was stuck in the same height. Ha, she scoffed in disbelief. Now she wanted to drink whatever vitamin the two of them had been taking. Maxen's eyes fell on Luc's hand, which was still holding Cosette's arm. Let her go, said Maxen, snapping his eyes up at Luc ever so tenderly. Luc gazed down and snorted, raising his chin at him. And if I don't want to, or you had been with her all summer, right. Cosette was busy during her internship, right, you must have missed her. Well, I visited her every time I have the time. Gosh, Luc abruptly stopped gloating when Cosette snapped her tongue in irritation, snatching her arm from Luc's grip. His hold wasn't tight. It was surprisingly loosened that she was able to free herself. This is unfair, she complained, darting her eyes between the two of them. How can you grow so tall? Maxen's brows rose and Luc blinked in puzzlement. The two of them sized her up before settling their eyes on her displeased expression. Cosette, did you shrink? Asked Luc with genuine wonder in his voice, causing her to snort in dismay. Although Maxen remained silent, he also had the same silly question. It wasn't like they grew that tall, or what these two young guys believed. Tusk, I can't believe you two. She shook her head, pivoting on her heel as she stomped her feet away grumpily. As she walked away, she couldn't help but complain. Shrink, what am I, something that withers while breathing? Goodness, this is probably just some sort of perks for the characters, she grumbled, knowing this was quite impossible for everyone, but I'm also a character too. They're still so young, but they are almost like already in their early 20s. Gosh, this is so unfair. While Cosette grumpily walked away, both Maxen and Luc idled on their spot. Their eyes remained on her back, tilting their heads to the side. She was complaining about their heights, but in their eyes, Cosette's figure was getting better, like a woman. Her uniform wasn't that fitted, but one could tell she had a good figure. Maxen, in particular, knew how great her body was since he had seen and touched her. His throat bobbed, shutting his eyes to stop himself from recalling the image of her underneath him. He shouldn't think about her flustered face with her mouth falling open, but to no avail. The more he told himself to forget about it, the more his imagination ran wild. He couldn't easily forget that sight of her, her eyes shining with desire while her exposed chest moved up and down heavily, the blush on her face while he hovered over her, the softness and the sweetness of her lips lingered in his mouth. Not to mention the feeling of her breast under his palm, and how her body shivered each time his lips kissed her on the lips and on the body. Yes, Cosette didn't grow taller, just like Luc and Maxen. However, her body figure had slowly become a woman's body. She had shamelessly paraded it in front of Maxen, back on the trip in the Quinn's family vacation home. Therefore, he could see the difference. Maxen let out a deep exhale, reopening his eyes. He glanced at Luc, who had already jogged to follow her, but Maxen was standing rotten on the ground. I promised her father, he thought, dragging his heavy feet to follow her and Luc, and it feels like torture. Just the thought of her was enough to make him hard. He already believed he was becoming a pervert for fantasizing about her, and that incident in the theater room in the Blac residence amplified his perverted desire. I need to get a grip, he told himself, running his fingers through his hair, but this would be a challenge that would constantly test his patience and self-control, since he had already had a taste of the delicacy. It wasn't his fault to crave for it. Little did he know, as they make their way to Winter High, something that would challenge Maxen's principles, morals, and his change awaits him. Chapter 117, always the same, but the feeling never gets old. The first day of class had always been the same every year, but at the same time, the feeling never got old. Students, particularly the seniors in their last year, were excited. The first-year students were either anxious about this new chapter of their life. Some were looking forward to what this new chapter in their life would bring them. Those in between would either gather at the gates or high-fiving with their previous classmates and friends. For sure, just like Cosette, Maxen, and Luc, who were entering the gates of the campus, they were simply glad to be in the same class. Cosette smiled, seeing students catching up with their circle of friends by the gates. Last year, she transferred in the middle of the school year. It was safe to say this was her first. Hence, the grin on her face and the luster in her eyes when she saw her friends calling and waving at her. Cozy Tilda, Faye called, waving at the entrance of the building. With her were Sarah and Amy, who were grinning excitedly at her. Faster. Goodness, they're early, Cosette mumbled, skipping her steps towards the girl, leaving Maxen and Luc behind her. As she sauntered off, Luc let out a deep exhale. He glossed his eyes around, rocking his head. Since he was the same as Cosette, transferring in the middle of the school year, this was his first time coming on his first day in this school. It's so different, he murmured, walking leisurely without paying attention to the other students walking in the same direction as him. Maxen kept a safe distance from him, but Luc didn't care. Luc kept his eyes ahead, watching Cosette reunite with her friends. The corner of his lips curled up, drawing a deep breath before huffing it sharply. Back in the academy, the first day was mostly a time to show off the cars that would drop off the students. It had almost become a tradition, bussing the student's value on the car that would drop the student. He hadn't seen anyone who would shamelessly squeal with their friends, or just fist bump upon meeting at the gates of the premises. There weren't luxury cars in sight or new gadgets or luxury bags, but somehow, this simple first day of school with nothing but the students' mixed energies brought a smile to his face. There's never a boring day with these peasants, he mumbled, glancing at Maxen as he said it louder for the latter to hear. Luc grinned playfully, shrugging. He then walked faster to catch up to Cosette since he was already prepared for the continuation of his courtship. Faster you, Luc gazed back at Maxen, or you'll be surprised that once you catch up, we're already dating. Maxen let out a shallow breath, watching Luc pick up his pace while calling for Cosette's name. But instead of taking Luc's advice, he walked at the same slow and steady pace. I should be the one telling him that, he murmured, shaking his head, keeping his eyes on Luc's back. He'll have a heart attack if he hears that we're already dating. Maxen would happily brag about his relationship with Cosette. Who wouldn't be proud? Aside from Cosette being the campus belle with tons and tons of admirers, she was kind and warm-hearted. Although, this time, Maxen agreed to keep their relationship a secret in school. Why? Because Cosette had tons of admirers, Luc included, and her fans club would surely ambush Maxen if they knew about it. They wanted to focus on their study this year, but that would be impossible if trouble follows him. It wasn't like he couldn't protect himself, but they both thought it was troublesome. He's still so arrogant, Maxen murmured, and then looked around the light atmosphere on the campus. For some reason, Maxen stopped in his tracks. This wasn't his first time attending the first day of class, but for obvious reasons, it looked foreign to him. Questions like had it always been like this? Was the first day always look so exciting? And at the same time, pressuring, Maxen honestly didn't have any idea. Because for him, school was a nightmare. He simply goes to school for the 1% chance that it would make his future better, but he didn't have high hopes. He was just doing it just so. He could say he had a high school diploma if he looked for jobs that wouldn't pay him well. I'm glad, Maxen raised his eyes, blinking to where Cosette and Luc were. They were already chatting with the girls, and some of their classmates had also approached them, making the group bigger. I'm glad I didn't. Stop. He pressed his lips, resuming in his steps ahead. In his mind, Cosette saved him more than she could have ever imagined. After all, Maxen had been considering stopping school with all the bullying and fighting in his everyday life. He was certain he would have stopped going to school altogether if not for her, but because she kept pestering him, and he kept thinking about her with all the unanswered questions in his head, he would always find himself going to school. Now, his life was better. Maxen was living a better life, and had regained the habit of dreaming about a brighter future with her in it. Therefore, as he walked closer to Cosette's group, he reminded himself of the things he had to keep in mind. I'll be good and study well, so in the future she won't have to worry about me, he told himself, keeping his eyes on Cosette's figure, shunning everyone else around her. This time around, from this moment on, I will always protect you. Maxen stopped several steps away from them, but his eyes remained on her. He was so focused on Cosette's side profile that he didn't notice the odd looks from his other classmates. Cozy, wow, how can you look even better than last school year? Faye was in awe, looking at Cosette from head to toe. Wow, that's all I can say. Gosh, you flatter me so much. Cosette laughed, raising her brows when she heard a male classmate's puzzled voice. Who's another transferee? Cosette furrowed her brows. Glancing at the male student, she then followed where he was looking, and her eyes landed on Maxen. The latter was standing a few steps away from their group, standing motionless, eyes on her. The second their eyes met, her heart skipped a beat, making her gulp slightly. However, unlike her reaction, her classmate had a completely different reaction. Some of them looked at Maxen from head to toe, unable to recognize him. If Cosette's heart fluttered in their eyes, Maxen's unchanging expression was akin to silently telling them to move and stop blocking the entrance. Wow, Faye muttered, blinking countless times at the beauty looking back at them. Ever since Cozy transferred to this school, most of the transferee looks good. Cozy, is she one of your admirers like Luc? Amy tugged Cosette's arm and whispered in the latter's ear, just how long is your hair? Sarah remained silent, studying the young student from head to toe. She heard Amy's whispers as she was just standing beside her. Now that I think about it, Sarah's brows furrowed. I hadn't seen Maxen. Would he be late again, on the first day of school? Goodness, look at you all. Luc clicked his tongue continuously, looking at everyone in disbelief. When his classmates' attention shifted to him, he continued. He just slimmed down and grew a bit taller. How can you all act as if he went under the knife? What? Faye cocked her head to the side, the same reaction from the rest of their classmates. What a lively bunch, Maxen mumbled, advancing in their direction to enter the building. He didn't have time to idle just like them, since he was serious about topping the class and graduating with at least good grades, so he could enter a good university without Conrad's backing. But just as Maxen walked past the students, with the students taking a step to the side, he grabbed Cosette's wrist. He stopped for a moment, tipping his head at the entrance of the building. Let's go, there will be a flag ceremony. Let's leave our things in the room first. Oh, right, Cosette nodded, and before she could wrap her head around the fire of determination in his eyes, Maxen already dragged her inside. What that? Luc gasped, watching Maxen take Cosette away from them. Meanwhile, their classmates looked at each other with the same puzzlement in their eyes. Who? Amy trailed off. Maxen's voice even deepened, thus, no one even recognized his voice. Is she Cozy's boyfriend? Faye muttered, cocking her head to the side, watching Cosette get dragged by Maxen. Well, they look good together, but where did that guy come from? Cozy is very pretty, so her boyfriend will want to guard her even if it means transferring to a different school. Sarah chimed in while rocking her head mildly. As everyone wondered and murmured their comments, they flinched when Luc's voice suddenly pierced their ears. Oi Maxen, Luc grumbled, stomping his feet to follow Maxen and Cosette. How dare you act like you are her boyfriend, huh? Everyone's eyes followed Luc and listened to his continuous yapping, causing their brows to furrow. They then looked at each other, wide-eyed. Some were pointing in the direction where the three left. That's Maxen, some female gasped as they looked at the entrance of the building with wide eyes. That's what he looks like without the fats and pimples. For a good 2 minutes, everyone was speechless and frozen on the spot. All they could do was stare at the entrance of the building, flabbergasted. It wouldn't take long before Maxen's sinful charms would spread around the campus, becoming the handsome prince named Luc's rival for the campus belle. And thus the beginning of another series of this love triangle, or something else. Chapter 118, Blockheads. On the first day of class in Winter High, all students were required to gather in the school's gymnasium for the flag ceremony and discuss important things for the year for both students and teachers. Each class and year lined up properly, and girls and boys were separated. Cozy, is it true? Cosette looked back when Faye tapped her shoulder. The latter leaned forward slightly, whispering in Cosette's ear. That guy, Faye pointed to the line where Maxen stood. That guy is Maxen Cloven. Ah, yes, she nodded, glancing at Faye and then at Maxen standing behind the line. She couldn't blame her classmates for questioning her, since she had the same reaction when she saw Maxen's glow-up. But that wasn't all. Cosette noticed that other students, especially girls, would either turn their heads whenever Maxen walked past them. Until now, Cosette could see female students whispering to each other and casting Maxen a look. Even a few of their classmates would blush at him. They were all scared of him just months ago, she thought, peeling her eyes away from Maxen to look at the school principal talking on the stage. She sighed, but I can't really blame them. Maxen really looks different months ago. He's really hot. When Cosette looked away, Maxen set his eyes in her direction. A shallow breath slipped past his lips before raising his brows. He glanced at the other students and noticed they were looking in his direction. The space between his brows deepened, glancing at his back, only to see Luke rolling his eyes in boredom. He always gets tons of attention, Maxen thought, shaking his head as he didn't bother with the odd gazes from the other students. In his understanding, they were looking in Luke's direction, not him. Yes, until now, Maxen hadn't noticed the interest he gathered from the other students, assuming they were for Cosette or Luke. Not that he wasn't used to the attention those two gathered. Hence, he didn't pay attention to it and waited for the flag ceremony to end. Students, teachers, may we all have a great school year, announced the school principal in his closing remarks. Maxen bet no one listened to the principal talking, but he didn't care. After the principal's long speech, the teachers approached the students, dismissing them back to their respective classrooms. Maxen immediately turned his head to where Cosette was, only to frown when he saw her friends were already dragging her with them. Well, Maxen shoved his hands inside his pockets, shrugging whatever negativity that was tempting to break his peace. I can always talk to her later. It's not like we're attending school just to flirt or hold hands. When Maxen turned on his heel, he halted, his brow arched, raising his eyes at Luke. What? Asked Maxen, while Luke raised his chin as if that would make him taller. What? Luke returned. It's still too crowded, I'd leave last. Maxen cocked his head to the side, and then simply shook his head. So what? He muttered, about to leave the gymnasium, only to stop once again when Luke grabbed his arm. What do you think you're doing? Maxen frowned in irritation, darting his eyes between Luke's hand and then to his face. Let me go. Oi, Maxen, are you seriously going to leave me here? I don't want to squeeze my way through all these students. Later. For a moment, Maxen could only stare at Luke with genuine wonder in his eyes. What was this guy up to now? Was he seriously stopping Maxen because Luke wanted to leave the gymnasium last? If Maxen didn't know any better, he would consider Luke having ulterior motives. But just as Maxen opened his mouth and snatched his arm away, he furrowed his brows and looked around. Some female students were blushing and whispering to each other, making the hair behind his neck raise. Although he didn't hear the indistinct chatterings, their eyes were enough to send this dread and dismay up his spine. I know that look, Maxen thought, grinding his teeth and glaring daggers at Luke. This guy. Maxen didn't think twice anymore and snatched his arm from Luke's grip. His face slightly dyed red out of embarrassment and anger, but the degenerates easily misunderstood his reaction. Why is this school so full of them? He muttered, clicking his tongue in irritation before he sauntered off. Is this the reason why she is into those sorts of stories? Hey, wait! Luke dramatically outstretched his hand in Maxen's direction, but to no avail. Heyest, that prick. Luke looked around the crowd and gulped. He then ground his teeth and followed Maxen, squeezing himself through the students which he wasn't used to. I told him to wait, geez, he grumbled, grinding his teeth intensely. I have something to tell him, never mind then. Whatever, I'm trying to do a good deed here, but he's so frustrating. As Maxen reached the hallway, a level below where his classroom was, he stopped and looked back. Seeing that aside from the students heading to their classroom, he seemed to have lost Luke. I should stay away from him, he thought, shaking his head. Maxen then resumed in his steps, but this time leisurely. Of all people they could ship that guy, why do they always choose me? Heck, Maxen wouldn't mind other people's opinions. However, knowing Cosette was also into boys' love that she would squeal her lungs out while reading it, it would affect him one way or another. Not that he had any grudges with the genre, but as long as he wasn't being dragged into it. I sort of feel drained, and the class hadn't even started yet, Maxen mumbled as he made a turn to the staircase, heading to the floor where his classroom was. However, just as he did, his steps halted. Maxen slowly raised his head and saw at least 3 guys idling on the stair landing. His eyes grew solemn as his jaw clenched. His grip on the handrail tightened, glossing his eyes over those 3 students' faces. "They're back," he thought, letting out a shallow breath. Those 3 male students, whose uniforms were unbuttoned, revealing their undershirts, looked down at where Maxen stood. They looked at each other and sneered, looking down at Maxen once again. "Maxen," called one student who had long hair that was tied in a bun. "Come up here, buddy." "Be good," Cosette's voice crossed Maxen's head, watching those 3 students whom Maxen hadn't seen since Cosette transferred to Winter High. And the reason was that these students were suspended for breaking all sorts of school rules. Maxen was nearly suspended as well, but by some luck, he got away from the scene with why these 3 and the rest were suspended. He let out a shallow breath, keeping his chin high as he calmly took the steps up until he reached the flat surface where those 3 were idling. Wow, he really looked different. One male student with a scar across his eyebrow walked around Maxen, looking at him from head to toe. "Wow, it seems you got a better life now, eh? Oi, I heard rumors you reunited with your rich dad and took you in. Is that true?" Another one, who was leaning in the corner, scoffed, hands in his pockets, eyes on Maxen. "Ha, by the looks of it, it was true. Just look at him, wow," the other guy with a scar on the eyebrow laughed. "That means you're loaded now, eh?" He then hooked an arm around Maxen and grinned. "Why don't you treat us to something to celebrate our return? I mean, we had our last warning, and we might get expelled if we caused another trouble." "That's right, boss is very disappointed that you didn't even visit him in the hospital." The other guy with long hair chimed in, leaning against the wall, eyes on Maxen. "Did you know he already got discharged? He'll be here this week." Maxen remained silent and looked at the 3 in silence. Even after their suspension, these 3 hadn't changed even the tiniest bit. Was the last gang fight they took part in wasn't enough? "I'm sorry, Win," Maxen smiled at the long-haired guy. "I always thought of visiting you in the juvie, but as you can see, I was a little busy trying to not end up just like you." Win, the long-haired student, snorted. However, he didn't say anything, as he only looked at Maxen with amusement. "Wow, look at him talk." The guy who had had arms resting across Maxen's shoulder rocked his head. "Well, you're always so ballsy, that's why you always get a beating." "Will you drag me somewhere to teach me a lesson now, Ya?" Maxen turned to Ya, who had this distinct scar across his brow. "Will you delay it later? Class is about to start soon. I don't want to be late." "Ha!" Ya let out an amused yet short laugh, looking at Win, the long-haired student, and then at the other one in the corner, Emma. "Hey, did you hear what this guy just said?" "Aha, it seems something never changes, even after all this time." Win rocked his head, looking at Maxen in disbelief. His desire to put this guy in his place like they had always done was apparent in his eyes. As the 3 exchanged knowing looks, Luke stopped on the staircase. He narrowed his eyes, sizing up the situation, and he already knew what was happening. "Oys, you blockheads, what the hell are you doing?" Chapter 119, A Glimpse of the Richest People's Darker Side. "Oys, you blockheads, what the hell are you doing?" Maxen and the 3 bullies shifted their attention to Luke. The latter stomped his feet on the step-up until he was standing tall on the flat surface. "Ha, and who is this pretty boy here?" Win, the long-haired student, cocked his head. "Did he just call us bookheads?" "Oi, aren't this the transferee last year? Hef, so he still doesn't know the rules here, huh?" The one leaning in the corner, Emma, sneered, gazing at Luke from head to toe. "It seemed our boy Maxen had a new friend, eh? Why don't you introduce us to him?" Ya, the one who had a scar across his eyebrow, tugged Maxen's shoulder. "You two seemed pretty close." "Ha," Luke scoffed, setting his eyes at Maxen. "Look at him, acting all tough when he can't even deal with these guys." Maxen arched a brow and glanced at Luke. "Go." "What?" "Mind your own business." Maxen snapped his eyes ever so tenderly, setting his eyes back to the long-haired student. "He's not my friend. Come, let me treat you to something nice." "Ha, is that so?" Win clapped, laughing in ridicule. He then tipped his head to the side, eyes on the one whose arm was resting across Maxen's shoulder. "Let's go. We will catch up with him since it's been a while." "Ah, this brings back the good old days." "Where are you all going?" Luke inquired, stopping the 4 from leaving the stairs they were standing on. He blinked innocently, watching the four of them look back at him. Oi Maxen, class is about to start. I'll be back. Maxen kept his cool, having a plan in his mind to return before the class starts. He just didn't want these people to target Luke, knowing these three weren't the only ones in their group. It'll be a hard time for that unsuspecting guy if these bullies cause trouble for him. Ha, what is this? He's acting like your bitch. Yar sneered, shaking his head at Luke. Let's go, buddy. Yar kept his arms over Maxen's shoulder as they turned to walk down the stairs. However, he stopped when Luke grabbed his arm, looking to his side where the latter stood. Oi Maxen, it's time for class. Luke kept his eyes on Maxen while his grip around Yar's arm tightened. Who are these guys? Obviously they're not your friends. You don't have friends other than me. Who said we're friends? Maxen furrowed his brows and cocked his head to the side. Oi, let me go. Maxen's eyes fell on Yar's arm where Luke was gripping him, and noticed the veins protruding on the back of Luke's hand. Right, we're not friends, we're rivals. However, I don't like it when you are letting these blockheads do what they want. Luke let Yar's go when the latter yelled and flung his arm, yet his attention remained on Maxen's. The only time Luke peeled his gaze away from Maxen was when he glanced at Yar. If I kicked him down the stairs, how long will it take for him to recover in the hospital? Obviously, he wouldn't die from this height, right? Luke glanced at the stairs where he came from, making Maxen furrow his brows. Oi, what is this fucker saying? Yar snorted as he glanced at the other two bullies. However, just as he looked away from Luke, the latter shoved his hands inside his pocket and raised a foot. Without a second hesitation, Luke planted his foot on Yar's abdomen and kicked him lightly. It wasn't a loud kick, but a kick that was enough to push Yar off the stairs. For a moment, Maxen and the other two bullies, Win and Emma, watched Yar roll down the stairs, wide-eyed. Maxen, in particular, had his brain go blank at Luke's action. Did he just kick Yar off the stairs? Maxen blinked, shifting his dilating eyes at Luke. Much to his dismay, Luke carried a bored expression while staring at Yar, who was grunting on the floor while holding his arm. This guy, is he not aware of what did he just do? Maxen was in a daze while staring at Luke. Meanwhile, Luke just let out a shallow breath and raised his eyes at the other three standing on the same surface as him. He didn't show the slightest remorse for kicking Yar. Actually, he didn't show any sign that he cared even if that fall killed the bully. I don't think he needs to go to the cafeteria now. The side of his lips curled up, snapping Win and Emma back to the current laps. You should bring him to the infirmary since he needs it more than filling up his stomach using someone else's hard-earned money. You, Emma, who finally recovered from his shock, turned to Luke, and as someone who grew up in a violent environment, he immediately raised his fist. However, Luke was quick enough to grab his wrist, twisting it on the bully's back before pressing him against the wall. Emma ground his teeth as his cheek squished against the wall with Luke, holding his wrist on his back, while Luke's arm was pressed across his back. Oi, seeing what was going on, Win, the long-haired one, threw a punch toward Luke's temple, but his fist stopped a palm length away from Luke because Maxen grabbed his wrist, using sheer brute force. Win's eyes dilated, gazing at Maxen, who was able to stop him just by grabbing his wrist. He tried to move his fist but to no avail, yet Maxen didn't even show the slightest sign he was exerting effort. That's enough, Maxen's eyes drooped, but the glint that flickered across them didn't go past Win's radar. Bring Yar to the infirmary, or should we wait for any teacher to see us? Ha, Maxen, you really did it. Fuck, Maxen let out a dry laugh, looking back at Win from head to toe. This is annoying. Come, throw a punch and let's just cause mayhem here like we always do. Maxen let go of Win's fist and crooked his fingers, taunting the latter to throw a punch. I already planned to do this somewhere else, but it seemed to throw your first is more important than bringing that guy to the infirmary. Win balled his hand into a fist, looking at Maxen furiously, but when he glanced down to where Yar was grunting on the floor, and at Emma, who was still pressed against the wall while Luke was looking back at him nonchalantly, he huffed. This wasn't the time to teach these two a lesson. You two will regret this, he spat out, glaring at Luke. Come on, Emma, let's bring that guy into the infirmary. Fuck, Emma groaned, wiggling his body. When Luke finally let him go, he glared at him and scoffed. Massaging his wrist, he spat out near Luke's foot. You better prepare that pretty face of yours. I'll mess it up later. Luke raised his hands and shrugged, watching Win and Emma take down the stairs. The two of them helped Yar, dragging him to the infirmary to get his arm or leg wrapped up. What do you think you're doing? Luke's brows rose when Maxen spoke. How can you kick that guy down the stairs just like that? It won't kill him, Luke shrugged, tilting his head to the side. I should be the one asking you. What do you think you're doing letting them gang up on you like that? Also, are you going to use the allowance that Cosette's dad works so hard for those goons? Oi Maxen, are you crazy? Maxen let out a deep exhale, shaking his head mildly. I can't believe you. He then turned on his heel, his hands on the handrail as he walked towards the stairs. Oi, did you really plan to let them drag you to the mud like they had always done? Luke hurriedly followed until he was walking beside Maxen. Did you forget Cosette is always stuck with you? I will kill you myself if she gets dragged in this mess. Maxen stopped at the last step and faced Luke. The treat I plan to give them is a couple of sweet fists. I plan to finish it quickly, but you just have to step in and make a scene. Wow, you're welcome. Luke clicked his tongue in irritation. Also, how can you say that fall won't kill him so easily? Maxen shook his head in disappointment. Aren't you afraid you'd get suspended? Why would I get suspended? Right, you're rich and you can just bribe everyone. Maxen let out a scoff, taking another step since he didn't want to deal with him right now. However, just as he did, he stopped when he heard Luke chuckle. It was an accident. Maxen looked back, only to see Luke smirking like a devil. I was on my way to my room when those three ambushed me, and when I tried to get away, that guy lost his footing and fell. Luke took a step ahead of Maxen and looked back at him with a confident smile. Who do you think they believe? Those troublemakers who were on the brink of expulsion? Or me, who never caused trouble before? Maxen, even when we have tons of money to spare, we use our minds to earn more and not lose more. He tapped his temple and grinned, turning on his heel as he sauntered off. Maxen could only stare at Luke's back, speechless at that guy's plan if they were caught. Surely, Luke always had a surprising side that would catch Maxen off guard most of the time. Right, he breathed out, idling on the same spot for some time. Although he acts dumb most of the time, he can be cunning and vicious if he must. It's just as Sir Conrad said, their world could be very dark and dangerous. Chapter 120 makes me sad. Meanwhile, in Class F, the second Cosette sat down in her usual seat. Sarah, Amy, and Faye rallied around her, dragging their seats to hers. She smiled awkwardly, glancing at their eyes that were sparkling with interest. What now? She asked under her breath, getting a bit more tired with all the students she had met so far. Cozy, what did you Maxen do this summer? How can he grow so tall? Faye asked giddily. Are you sure he didn't go under the knife? Faye, how old do you think Maxen is? Sarah, who was across Cosette's desk, scrunched her nose up. But it's not like he couldn't. There were others who get nose jobs at 16. Amy, who was on Cosette's left, taking up Maxen's chair, chimed in. Maxen just slimmed down because he had been working out and on a strict healthy diet. Cosette let out a deep sigh, shaking her head whilst casting them a quick look. He's still that same old Maxen. It's not like he changed anything. Cosette, you have a good eye, don't you? Faye bumped her shoulder against Cosette. We all know Max doesn't look that bad, but we didn't expect he is more handsome than Luke. Faye, how dare you say that? Amy narrowed her eyes. Luke still looks better. I can't believe you two are comparing. Sarah shook her head in disappointment. Have you not heard the saying, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder? Hey, Mommy Sarah, you're just playing it safe, eh? Faye clicked her tongue playfully before setting her attention back to Cosette. How about you, Cozy? What do you think? What do you mean? Cosette tilted her head to the side. Who looks better, Luke or Max? Amy clarified and then shook her head as she changed her mind. Never mind that. The question should be who is ahead between the two. Cosette's brows furrowed, and when she didn't answer, Faye sighed. What she means is, since both of them are wooing you, who do you think will get your sweet yes? Faye translated in simple terms. This time, even Sarah showed interest, waiting for Cosette's answer with bated breaths. Maxen, of course, he's already my boyfriend. Cosette bit her tongue from speaking her thoughts aloud, humming a long tune. She then smiled, motioning a zip action before her lips. Oh, come on, Faye intoned in disappointment. Weren't we friends? Cozy, I'm so disappointed in you. Amy pouted, while Sarah chuckled but the latter didn't pry. Luke and Max were our friends and classmates. Cosette grinned at them. It's not like I'm trying to put them in competition or something since my dad is quite strict. He told me not to date until I'm 50. What? Faye's expression died, looking back at Cosette in disbelief. Does your father loves you? He loves me so much he doesn't want to give his only daughter away. You're an only daughter, Amy gasped, and only then did they realize Cosette, even though they had been friends with her, the latter rarely shared anything about her personal life. You don't know, Cosette cocked her head to the side. You rarely share things like that with us, Faye pointed out, making Cosette rock her head in understanding. Well, there's nothing much to share anyway. A grin replaced the slight shock look on Cosette's face, drawing a deep breath. So, anything interesting during the summer break? It was boring, Faye answered and Amy followed. The only interesting that happened is when the leads of the book I'm reading finally confessed their feelings and did the deed. Mine was the same. I did have a part-time in my aunt's store though. Sarah smacked her lips and the three of them looked back at Cosette with interest. How about you? Well, actually, Cosette trailed off, noticing the glint that shone in the girls' eyes. No wonder they were so interested in everything that was going on in this school, especially in this class. They had nothing else to do. A faint exhale escaped Cosette's nostrils as she summarized her summer, telling them she also did a part-time in her father's business, without detailing how huge this business was. As she did so, she inevitably shared not seeing Maxen for almost 2 months, and was just as surprised as them when she met Maxen just 1 week ago. The three of them engaged in gossip-like conversation, talking about their summer, instead of badmouthing others to strengthen their bond. Not just them, but mostly, everyone in the classroom was catching up with their own circle of friends. When the door flung open and the homeroom teacher's voice silenced the lively chatterings of their classroom, everyone dispersed and returned to their respective seats. Cosette perked up, raising her brows, catching Luke strut behind the teacher, winking at her. Luke stood beside Cosette's desk, and then sat on the chair on her right, Faye's original spot. As soon as he plopped his butt down, he turned to Cosette when she asked a question. "Where have you gone?" She blinked twice, studying his mood, and noticing he seemed to be in a better mood now. "Here, I met a few people on the way." Luke rested his arms on his desk, smiling playfully. "Why, did you miss me?" Cosette sighed, shaking her head. A second later, she caught a figure entering the room. She raised her eyes and smiled subtly, seeing Maxen enter with a cool air around him. Like usual, Maxen was unbothered by the gazes thrown at him, advancing in his seat near the window in silence. Maxen only cast Cosette a quick look, but said nothing. She was used to it by now that she didn't pay attention to it, setting her eyes ahead as their homeroom teacher stood in the front with his hands on the table, while watching everyone settle in their seats. Little did Cosette know, Luke had been observing her in silence, his jaw propped against his knuckles, eyes and attention on Cosette. Thus, he caught the relief in her eyes as soon as Maxen came in. Luke was silent, ignoring the homeroom teacher's sentiments regarding the students' grades last school year. Instead, he kept his full attention to Cosette's side profile, and his mind drifted to his memory this morning. Sitting in the backseat of the car, Luke had this small smile on his face while staring at his phone screen. The wallpaper he was using was a selfie of him and Cosette, during her time as an intern in the BLK Corporation. Luke would often visit her but only met her a few times since she was buried with work. Cosette had a tight schedule, but he appreciated the time she would spare whenever she could. The photo was one of them, although the selfie was the two of them looking at each other, Cosette glaring at him while he was grinning candidly at her. "She's always fun to tease," he mumbled, snapping his eyes up. His brows furrowed as he caught two familiar figures walking on the sidewalk. "Second young master, that's Miss Black," said the driver, slowing down the car lest Luke wanted to pick her up. But silence was the only answer he received from Luke, as the latter kept his eyes on Cosette and Maxen. Luke's breath hitched as his heart thudded, studying the smile on Cosette while talking to Maxen. From his perspective, the two of them looked happy and content. He had been surrounded by different types of people to know how to read the air, and Luke was aware there was something different between the two of them. His eyes then fell on Maxen and Cosette's hands that were brushing against each other from time to time. His jaw tightened, holding his phone tighter. "Drive faster," he ordered, peeling his eyes away from them as he glanced at the driver through the rear mirror. The driver furrowed his brows but didn't pry. "Yes." With that being said, the driver stepped on the pedal and drove past Cosette and Maxen. However, Luke winced and clicked his tongue in irritation before yelling, "Stop!" The car screeched as the driver abruptly stepped on the brake, making Luke raise his foot against the back of the front passenger seat. The driver glanced at the rear mirror, looking back at the second young Master Quinn through the rear mirror. Luke ruffled his hair in irritation, cursing under his breath. "Damn," he then huffed, looking back. "Go back," that was all Luke said, and as ordered, the driver drove in reverse, stopping at where Cosette and Maxen were. The driver studied Luke's upset expression, which was immediately replaced with a huge smile when the second young master rolled the window down. "Lucas Quinn." Cosette furrowed her brows when the homeroom teacher called Luke's name for a roll call, but Luke hadn't replied even after being called 3 times. She turned to her side, furrowing her brows, seeing that Luke was staring at her silently. "Luke," she called, tipping her head in the teacher's direction. However, Luke ignored the teacher for a moment. "Cozy, you make me sad," he whispered, and then raised his hand, shifting his attention to the homeroom teacher. "Here."